The desert air was dry enough to crack lips and sting eyes, even inside the canvas briefing tent. The diesel generators hummed faintly in the background, powering a flickering projector that cast ghostly light across the map pinned to the board. Around the long folding table sat 12 men in combat, fatigues bearded, scarred, restless, men forged by battle. Their patches marked them as U.S. Special Forces, Green Barretts, Rangers, and one Navy SEAL temporarily attached for the mission. They were America's sharp edge, the kind of soldiers who were dropped into impossible situations and somehow clawed their way out. Among them sat someone who didn't fit. Sergeant Elena Marcus. Her uniform was the same, but the details gave. Her away cleaner boots, less wear on her plate carrier, and hands that didn't carry the permanent stains of gun oil. She was an intelligence officer, not a door kicker. Her job was code-breaking, signal interception, napping enemy movement. She belonged in a climate-controlled trailer filled with computer screens, not a desert outpost. Yet here she was, seated, with men who treated firefights as daily routine. Colonel Briggs, their commanding officer, stood at the head of the table. His voice was gravel, every syllable clipped. "All right, listen up. This one matters. The valley here," he jabbed a finger at the map, highlighting a long stretch of ridgeline, "is the artery. Whoever controls it, controls movement across half this province. Supply convoys, humanitarian aid, troop reinforcements, everything. The enemy knows it. That's why they fortified the ridges on both sides." He clicked the remote, and a satellite image replaced the map. Jagged cliffs framed the valley floor like the teeth of a trap. "We've had 3 convoys ambushed here in the last month," Briggs continued. 2 destroyed completely. We can't keep bleeding resources and men. Your job is to clear and hold the valley long enough for engineering teams to move in and set up permanent overwatch positions. No one spoke. Missions like this weren't new. Still, the terrain made it ugly. High ground on both sides meant they'd be targets the moment they set foot inside. Intel suggests multiple sniper nests, at least 2 heavy machine gun positions, and mobile mortar teams, Briggs went on. Expect RPGs. Expect IEDs. Hell, expect the whole damn arsenal. You'll have CAS support on standby, but weather's unpredictable. Don't rely on air cover too much." He looked over the room, pausing briefly on Elena. "You'll insert at 0400 before dawn. Stealth is key. Once the engineers arrive, you hold the line until relief forces move in. Simple on paper, hard in practice." A ranger at the table smirked. "When is it ever simple, sir?" Laughter rippled, low and grim. Briggs didn't. "Smile. You'll move light and fast," he said. "But you'll have heavy options. We're issuing the M240, a T4 launchers, and 1 Barrett M82.50 cal rifle. That weapon," he let the words hang, "will be your ace. If their snipers own the ridge, the Barrett levels the playing field. Treat it like gold." A mention of the Barrett drew respectful nods. The rifle was a monster, nearly 5 feet long, weighing 30 pounds. It could destroy light vehicles, penetrate fortified positions, and eliminate targets at ranges most rifles couldn't dream of. But it was no ordinary firearm. It required strength, training, and steady nerves. Only the team's designated sniper, Sergeant Keller, was truly qualified to use it. As Briggs dismissed them, Elena lingered at the edge of the table, staring. At the satellite image, she wasn't supposed to be there. Her initial orders had been simple: embed with the unit temporarily, provide live intel on enemy radio chatter, and coordinate with drone feeds. But a last-minute reassignment meant she'd have to step beyond her comfort zone. She remembered when the colonel first told her, "You've got the training, Sergeant. Maybe not the years, but you know enough, and you'll have protection." She had nodded, but doubt gnawed at her. Protection? Out there, protection was a myth. That night, she couldn't sleep. The tent was filled with the rhythmic snores of men who could fall asleep anywhere. Foxholes, helicopters, bunkers. Elena lay awake, staring at the canvas ceiling. Her mind replayed the colonel's words. "The Barrett will be your ace." She had fired one once, during advanced weapons training years ago. She remembered the recoil slamming into her shoulder, the way the world seemed to crack apart with the shot. The instructors had laughed good-naturedly as she struggled to steady the massive rifle. "Stick to the laptops, Marquez," one had joked. She had laughed too, embarrassed, but relieved she'd never need to use it in combat. Now, sleep wouldn't come. Her hands trembled slightly as she thought about what awaited in that valley. At 0300, the team assembled by the helicopters. The rotors thumped slow and heavy, blades chopping through the night air. The desert sky was moonless, stars sharp and cold. The men checked gear with ritualistic precision. Magazines slapped into rifles, belts tightened, helmets adjusted. Keller cradled the Barrett like a sacred object, his movements reverent. Elena double-checked her headset, her encrypted radio, her sidearm. She felt naked compared to the others. Captain Dawson, their field leader, walked down the line. His presence radiated calm authority. "Listen up. We move in dark. We move in quiet. Keep chatter down. Stick to the plan. Trust your team. You've all done this before. Marquez," his eyes locked on her, "you just stay sharp with those comms. We'll keep you covered." She nodded quickly, grateful for his reassurance. When the order came, they filed onto the helicopters. The doors slammed shut, and the engines roared louder, lifting them into the sky. Elena's stomach lurched as the base fell away, lights shrinking to pinpricks. The cabin was dim, red interior lights casting shadows across determined faces. No one spoke. Each man was in his own head, running through drills, picturing worst-case scenarios. Elena gripped her rifle tightly. She tried to mimic their calm, but her heart raced. She wasn't one of them, not really. And yet, fate had placed her here, among America's deadliest warriors, about to step into a valley where death waited. On every ridge. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe slow. If the mission briefing had been the calm before the storm itself was only minutes away. The helicopters touched down in silence, rotors whipping up sandstorms that stung exposed skin. The soldiers spilled out quickly, crouched low, weapons ready. Within seconds, the aircraft lifted back into the night, leaving only fading echoes. And the smell of jet fuel. The valley lay ahead of them, a yawning black scar carved into the desert. Its ridges rose like walls on either side, jagged teeth silhouetted faintly against a dim horizon. The air was still, unnaturally still, as though the landscape itself was holding its breath. Captain Dawson raised his fist, signaling a halt. The team fanned out, night vision goggles flickering green across the terrain. "Movement," he whispered over comms. "Negative," Keller, the sniper, responded, his Barrett strapped across his back for now. Elena crouched low behind a boulder, her earpiece alive with faint static. She tuned the receiver, straining for enemy chatter. For a moment, there was nothing but the whisper of wind. Then snippets. A voice, faint, foreign, clipped. Coordinates. Directions. Her heart quickened. "They know we're here," she whispered. Dawson's eyes darted to her, then to the ridgeline. "Copy. Eyes up. Stay sharp." Bettine moved forward in staggered formation. Boots crunching gravel. Every shadow seemed alive. The ridges loomed higher, narrowing the valley into a choke point. And then the first shot cracked. It was a high, sharp thunderclap, and one of the rangers crumpled with a strangled cry. Bettine dove for cover instantly, instincts honed by years of firefights. The night erupted into chaos. Automatic gunfire raked the valley, sparks flying off stone, dirt spraying from impact. Tracers streaked overhead like fireflies from hell. Sniper, left ridge, 11 o'clock. Keller shouted, already swinging the Barrett into position. Elena's ears rang as she flattened behind a rock. She peeked up long enough to see muzzle flashes blinking along the ridge like fireflies. They weren't facing one sniper, they were facing a nest. Multiple shooters. Keller cursed, firing a deafening blast. The recoil slammed his shoulder, but his shot was true. One of the flashes went dark. It didn't matter. More opened. Up from the opposite ridge. The team was caught in a crossfire. Get smoke out. Move, Dawson barked. A green beret lobbed smoke grenades, plumes billowing into the night. For a few precious seconds, cover returned. The men scrambled to reposition, dragging the wounded ranger with them. Elena pressed herself flat, every muscle trembling. She clutched her rifle, but felt small, useless, like a child holding a toy in a war zone. Another explosion rocked the valley, a mortar round, landing close enough to rain shrapnel. Screams. Cut through the radio. They're zeroing us in. A ranger shouted. Elena forced herself to tune her receiver again, sweat dripping down her brow despite the cool night. She caught fragments of enemy chatter, orders, coordinates, laughter. They were organized, disciplined, and confident. They've set up. Kill zones, she said urgently. Left ridge is drawing us in, right ridge is the hammer. Dawson's jaw tightened. He trusted her intel, but the team was bleeding. Another man was down, clutching a leg wound. The Barrett thundered again, Keller picking off another shooter, but there were too many. And then fate struck cruelly. A burst of machine gun fire erupted from above. Keller, mid-aim, was thrown backward, the Barrett tumbling from his hands. He groaned, clutching his side, blood soaking into the dust. Elena, someone shouted. Medic! She scrambled to Keller's side, her fingers trembling as she pressed down on the wound. The sniper's breath came ragged. His eyes burned. With frustration. The rifle, he hissed, his voice barely audible. Don't let it go. Elena's gaze flicked to the Barrett, lying abandoned in the dirt. Its black frame gleamed under tracer light, monstrous and silent, waiting. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She had trained with it once, years ago. She remembered the crushing recoil, the laughter of her instructors. She wasn't supposed to touch it again. She wasn't strong enough. She wasn't skilled enough. But around her, the team was faltering. Machine guns and mortar pinned them down. If someone didn't take those nests out, they would all die. In that valley, another mortar round exploded closer this time, showering them in dust and rock. The wounded groaned, the healthy shouted desperately, returning fireblind into the darkness. Elena's eyes locked on the Barrett again. Her hands shook. Her mind screamed at her to stay down, to survive, to let the real soldiers handle it. But the real soldier who could had just gone down. Marcus. Dawson barked, dragging another man behind cover. We need eyes on that ridge. Elena swallowed hard, her throat dry as sand. She thought of her training. She thought of the maps, the intercepted signals, the intelligence reports she had written from safe offices. She had always told herself she wasn't the one pulling the trigger. She was the one behind the screen, supporting those who did. But support wasn't enough anymore. She released pressure on Keller's wound, just long enough to grab the Barrett. By its handle. It was heavier than she remembered, nearly dragging her arms down. She heaved it close, dropped to her stomach, and shoved the bipod legs into the dirt. The rifle loomed in front of her like a beast. She slid her eye to the scope, heart thundering so hard she could barely see straight. Through the green haze of her night vision, she caught a muzzle flash. A sniper's nest, clear as day. Her finger hovered over the trigger. This was it. The moment. The line between living and dying, between being a soldier and being a statistic. She took a breath, steadied her trembling hands, and began to squeeze. The Barrett rested against Elena's shoulder like a slab of steel and inevitability. Every part of her body screamed that this wasn't her weapon, that she was a fool for even touching it. Yet the battlefield left her no choice. Through the scope, the world narrowed to green-tinted shapes. The ridge looked alive, muzzle flashes, winking like stars, bursts of tracer fire slicing through the air. The enemy owned the high ground, raining death with precision. Her teammates were crouched behind shattered rocks, pinned, desperate. The balance was slipping fast. Marquez. Captain Dawson barked from a few meters away, ducking a spray of fire. Pick them off, or we're done here. She tightened her grip. The trigger was cold beneath her finger. The memory of her single training session years ago returned in brutal clarity. She remembered the instructor's smirk as she staggered. From the recoil, bruised and humiliated. Stick to intel, Sergeant. You're smart, not strong. The words echoed now, poisonous, just as real as the enemy bullets snapping overhead. But Keller's blood was still warm on her gloves. His voice rang in her ears. Don't let it go. She drew in a breath. One shot, just one. Elena exhaled, sighted on the brightest muzzle flash, and pulled. The rifle roared like thunder, a sound so deep it seemed to shake the valley itself. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, numbing her arm. For a fraction of a second, her vision blurred. Then she blinked, and the ridge fell silent in one spot. A body tumbled, rolling lifeless down the slope. The silence lasted only a heartbeat, but for the team it was enough. Shouts rang out. Hit confirmed. One down. Adrenaline surged through her veins. Her pulse steadied, her breathing slowed. She adjusted the scope, found another flash, and fired again. Another roar, another jolt. This time the shot tore through the wall of a machine gun nest. Sparks flew, then screams. The nest went quiet. The valley was no longer one-sided. Good shooting, Marquez, Dawson shouted, rallying the team. Keep covering. The soldiers moved in rhythm now, emboldened by the sudden shift. Grenades arced into the smoke, rifles cracked with renewed fury. Elena felt something shift inside her. Fear wasn't gone, but it had been forced into the background, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. She worked the Barrett like she'd been born to it. Bolt, sight, fire. Bolt, sight, fire. Each thunderous. Blast sent another target sprawling or another nest shattering. Her shoulder throbbed. Her ears rang even through the headset, but she kept going. Still, the enemy wasn't breaking easily. Mortar continued to pound the valley floor, each explosion throwing men off their feet. A ranger screamed as shrapnel tore into his leg. Another soldier dragged him behind cover, shouting for a medic. Elena forced herself not to look. She couldn't. If she lost focus for even a second, the tide would turn back against them. Through the scope, she caught movement 3 figures, sprinting toward a higher vantage point, carrying something long and heavy. RPGs. Her gut clenched. If they got into position, the team's cover would be obliterated. She tracked them, steadying her breath. The crosshairs danced for a moment, then stilled. She squeezed. The blast ripped through the night. One figure dropped instantly, the RPG clattering from his hands. She shifted aim before the others could react. Another shot, another target down. The third froze, panicked, before scrambling away into the rocks. For the first time since the ambush began, the enemy faltered. "Push forward," Dawson commanded. The teen surged, firing and moving in leaps, advancing through the smoke and dust. Elena stayed prone, laying down thunderous cover fire with every step they took. The Barrett was more than a rifle. It was the hammer striking down from heaven, scattering the enemy's grip on the ridges. But victory was not yet assured. Elena's scope caught sight of a new nest further up the ridge, an elevated position with a mounted DSHK heavy machine gun. If it opened fire, it would chew through her team like paper. Her mouth went dry. The gunner was shielded behind sandbags. A normal rifle couldn't punch through. But the Barrett wasn't normal. She drew in another breath, steadied, and fired. The round tore through sandbags like butter. The gunner collapsed backward, lifeless. The heavy machine gun went still. The teen roared approval. Even in the chaos of battle, Elena could hear their voices. "Hell yeah, Marquez. She's killing it." But she didn't feel triumphant. She felt necessary. For the first time in her career, she wasn't support. She wasn't background noise. She was the linchpin keeping her brothers alive. Her shoulder ached like fire. Every recoil felt like a sledgehammer against bone. Sweat stung her eyes. Her arms trembled from the rifle's weight. But she refused to let go. She couldn't. Another muzzle flash. Another target. Another silence. The valley began to change. Where moments before it had been a death trap, now the tide was shifting. Enemy fire slackened. Positions collapsed. Movement turned from advance to retreat. Elena adjusted her scope, sweeping the ridge. A faint smile tugged at her lips despite the chaos. For the first time that night, she believed survival was possible. Keller, half-conscious beside her, groaned weakly. His eyes flicked open, finding her. His lips curled in a pained grin. "Not bad for intel," he rasped. Her throat tightened. She nodded once, never breaking her aim. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The valley wasn't. Cleared, and reinforcements could arrive at any moment. Their escape was far from certain. Still, as another shot echoed across the cliffs, Elena felt it hope. Fragile, flickering, but real. The Barrett had spoken. And for the first time that night, doom no longer felt inevitable. Smoke burned her lungs. Grit scraped her teeth, and the air was filled with the metallic tang of blood and gunpowder. The Barrett's roar still echoed across the cliffs, but the battlefield was far from quiet. Mortar thumped in the distance. Small arms fire rattled off stone, and shouts of pain and fury blended into a symphony of chaos. Elena lay prone, cheek pressed to the dusty earth, the massive rifle cradled against her shoulder. Her body throbbed with every shot she had fired. Her muscles begged her to stop, to let go of the weapon before it broke her. But her mind refused. She had made her choice the moment Keller fell. And yet, even as adrenaline surged through her, a war waged inside her chest. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't built for this. She was the one who listened, who decoded, who analyzed. She didn't pull the trigger that ended lives. That was for the others men who lived in perpetual motion between firefights. But the truth clawed at her. The others couldn't do it without her. "Marquez." Dawson's voice cut through the din. He slid behind cover a few feet away, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. "We've got to move up, but those ridges will eat us alive. We need you holding that rifle." Her heart hammered harder. She wanted to shout, "I'm not a sniper." She wanted to shove the Barrett away and let someone else take it. But no one else could. Keller was down. The others were carrying their own fights. And the weapon this beast of steel and recoil had already spoken in her hands. Dawson leaned closer, his eyes fierce. You're the only thing keeping us from getting buried here. I don't care if you think you're not ready. You're doing it." He didn't wait for an answer. He sprinted back into the haze, barking orders to the team. Elena swallowed hard. Her shoulder throbbed as if bruises were blooming under the skin, each one a reminder of the cost of her decision. She reloaded with shaky fingers, the massive magazine clicking into place. She lined up her scope again, searching for movement. Through the lens, she saw them 3 silhouettes darting between rocks, dragging equipment. Another mortar team. If they set up, the team's position would be obliterated. Elena exhaled, steadied the crosshairs, and fired. The first figure dropped instantly, crumpling like a ragdoll. The second froze in terror, then bolted. Elena shifted, squeezed, and sent him sprawling. The third figure dove for cover, vanishing behind stone. Her hands trembled as she pulled back from the scope. She had killed again. She couldn't deny it, couldn't rationalize it as support fire. These weren't simulations or intercepted signals. These were people-enemy combatants. Yes, but flesh and blood, now silenced by her hands. Her stomach twisted. For a moment, she thought she might vomit. But the gunfire around her snapped her back. Survival left no room for guilt. Keep it up. Someone shouted nearby. She forced herself to refocus, pushing her fear into a dark corner of her mind. She would deal with the weight of it later, if there was a later. The team pressed forward under her cover, moving in leaps from one rock formation to the next. Grenades detonated, rifles barked, boots pounded against gravel. Every time an enemy muzzle flash threatened to pin them down, Elena struck. Each thunderous shot of the Barrett carved a hole in the resistance, opening paths where there had been only walls of fire. But the enemy adapted. A fresh burst of tracer fire streaked from the far ridge, brighter, heavier. Elena adjusted her scope and froze. It wasn't rifles this time. It was a mounted heavy machine gun, shielded by crude barricades of stone and sandbags. Its barrel glowed as it spat fire, shredding rock around Dawson's position. If it locked onto them, there would be no escape. Elena's pulse skyrocketed. The gunner was shielded. The range was extreme. One mistake, and the team would be shredded before she could reload. She drew in a long breath, teeth clenched, and focused the crosshairs on the small gap in the barricade. For a moment, her vision swam, her body screaming in fatigue. She whispered to herself, "Steady, steady." The rifle bucked, roaring like thunder. Through the scope, she saw the gunner collapse backward, arms flailing. The heavy machine gun went silent, smoke rising from its barrel. Relief hit her like a wave, but it was short-lived. The enemy still pressed them hard, pouring fire from every angle. "Marquez!" Keller's voice rasped weakly from beside her. He was pale, lips cracked, but his eyes burned with something fierce. "Don't stop. Don't you dare stop." She looked at him, heart clenching. This man had carried the Barrett in countless battles. He had been the team's shield, their angel of death from above. Now he was broken on the ground, entrusting her with his mantle. "I'm not you," she whispered. Keller coughed a bloody laugh. "You don't have to be. Just don't miss." She turned back to the scope, the weight of his words pressing into her chest like another weapon. The night stretched on, each minute feeling like an hour. Elena lost herself in the rhythm spot, aim, fire, reload. Each shot rattled her bones, bruised her flesh, but also steeled her will. She had crossed the threshold of hesitation. Every time she squeezed the trigger, the doubt in her heart dimmed. Somewhere in the chaos, she realized the fear had changed. It wasn't about dying anymore. It was about failing, about letting the men beside her fall because she hadn't done enough. That fear drove her harder than survival ever could. The valley floor was littered with smoke, bodies, and the twisted remains of weapons. The ridges still spat defiance, but their fire was no longer overwhelming. Piece by piece, Helena was tearing the enemy's grip apart. At one point, she caught sight of Dawson, sprinting across open ground, dragging a wounded ranger to safety. For a brief second, his eyes met hers. He gave a sharp nod, a silent acknowledgement that without her, they'd all be corpses already. The nod hit her harder than recoil. She wasn't just holding the line. She was part of it. By the time the shooting began to thin, Elena's body was wrecked. Her shoulder burned raw, her cheek was sore from the rifle's stock, and her arm shook violently between shots. She didn't know how many rounds she'd fired, only that she had kept going long past the point she thought she could. And yet, she wasn't finished. The enemy hadn't given up, and neither could she. Her choice had been made. She wasn't the intel officer hiding behind data anymore. She was the rifle. She was the wall between life and death for every man in her team. And she would not put it down until the valley was theirs. The world had shrunk to a circle of green light. Elena's eye pressed against the Barrett scope, the edges of her vision blurred by sweat and smoke. All that existed was the crosshair, the jagged ridge, and the pinpoint spark of an enemy muzzle flash. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle thundered, the recoil slamming her shoulder like a hammer. The shock rolled through her bones, and for a split second, she thought she'd misfired, that she'd been knocked senseless. Then the ridge went quiet. A figure toppled backward, rifle clattering against stone. The silence was brief, but it carried. Her teammates noticed instantly. "One down," a ranger shouted. Elena blinked, chest heaving. She'd done it, the impossible. She had reached across the valley and silenced the threat that had pinned them for so long. The thought barely had time to form before another flash sparked to life higher up the ridge. Her hands moved on instinct, bolt pulled, round-chambered, scope aligned. The Barrett roared again, the sound echoing off the cliffs like cannon fire. This time the shot ripped through a boulder, shattering stone into fragments. Dust plumed, followed by the sharp cry of another enemy fighter cut down. The valley seemed to pause. Even the enemy hesitated at the sound of that rifle, at the devastation it unleashed with each shot. "Elena, keep firing." Dawson's voice rang through the chaos, fierce and commanding. "We've got the push." Her heart slammed against her ribs. There was no time to celebrate, no time to question. She reloaded, scanned, and found another target. The third shot was smoother. Her breathing steadied, her trigger squeeze more deliberate. The Barrett spoke, and another body slumped lifeless on the ridge. The men around her rallied, emboldened by her precision. They leapt from cover to cover, laying down suppressive fire as they advanced. Grenades boomed, carving gaps in the enemy's defenses. Elena lost herself in the rhythm. The Barrett bucked, and the world responded. Shot after shot, the battlefield bent to her will. Every time a muzzle flash threatened her brothers, she smothered it. Every time a shadow crept toward a firing position, she struck it down. She wasn't thinking anymore. She was acting, moving in harmony with the rifle. But the enemy was far from finished. Movement flickered at the edge of her Scope 3 fighters, crawling into position with an RPG launcher. They were aiming for Dawson's group as they maneuvered up the valley floor. If that rocket fired, half the team would be gone. Panic surged in her chest. She adjusted her scope, but the fighters were shielded by rocks. Only slivers of their bodies were visible. Her finger hovered on the trigger, hesitation gnawing at her. One wrong shot, and the launcher would fire. "Come on, Marquez," she whispered, steady. Her body screamed from fatigue, but her mind sharpened. She drew a long, steady breath, found the narrow gap, and fired. The round tore through stone and flesh alike. The man holding the launcher collapsed, the weapon slipping from his grasp. His comrades scrambled in panic. Elena worked the bolt, fired again, and another dropped. The third bolted into the shadows, vanishing. Dawson's voice crackled in her earpiece. "You just saved all our asses, Marcus. Keep it up." Her throat tightened, but she didn't have the breath to reply. She reloaded again, shoulders aching, cheek bruised from the relentless stock. Keller groaned beside her, half conscious but watching. His voice was a whisper, hoarse but proud. "That's how you do it. Make the rifle sing." Elena swallowed hard. She wanted to tell him she wasn't ready, that she was just pretending, that every shot felt like a gamble with fate. But she couldn't speak. The rifle demanded her focus. Minutes bled together into an endless barrage. Elena's world became a cycle of action. Sight, breath, squeeze, thunder, repeat. She stopped counting shots. She stopped counting bodies. All she knew was that every thunderclap meant another second of survival for her team. Her shoulder felt like raw meat. Each recoil was agony now, but she gritted her teeth and endured. Pain was a distant problem, one she'd deal with later if later ever came. She remembered her first day of weapons training years ago, when she could barely steady a standard rifle. She remembered the laughter of the instructors, the doubt of her peers. Not a shooter, not built for combat. And yet here she was, laying waste to an ambush designed to annihilate them. The irony would have been bitter if not for the desperation around her. Machine gun nest, 2 o'clock high. Dawson's voice snapped her attention to the far ridge. She adjusted, found the nest, and squeezed. The Barrett roared. The sandbags exploded in a spray of dust and blood. Cheers erupted behind her. It wasn't just the teens' morale that shifted, it was the enemy's. Their fire grew sporadic, frantic. Fighters darted between cover with less confidence, their advance faltering. The Barrett had stolen their rhythm, their certainty. For the first time, Elena realized she was doing more than surviving. She was breaking them. But the battlefield had a cruel way of punishing victory too soon. A sudden burst of tracers streaked from the ridge above. One of the rangers cried out, clutching his chest, collapsing in a heap. Elena's stomach twisted, rage surging in her veins. She scanned, found the shooter, and fired. The man barely had time to register the crosshairs before he was gone. Her breath came ragged. She couldn't save them all, no matter how fast she pulled the trigger. The thought cut deep, but she shoved it aside. Regret was a luxury. Dawson's voice rang again. "We've got an opening. Push forward." The team surged, dragging the wounded, firing and advancing. Elena kept covering, her rifle a thunderous guardian angel. Each shot cleared another step of their path. Each impact carved out hope where none had existed minutes before. Her arms trembled violently now. Sweat drenched her uniform. Her vision blurred at the edges, but she kept going. She couldn't stop. Not until they were safe. Finally, after what felt like hours, the valley began to quiet. Enemy fire dwindled, the ridges scarred with bodies and shattered cover. The once dominant ambush was collapsing, retreating into the shadows. Elena exhaled shakily, pulling her cheek from the stock. Her ears rang with silence that felt almost alien after the chaos. Her body sagged, muscles trembling, but she kept her hands on the Barrett. She didn't trust the quiet. Not yet. Dawson dropped beside her, panting, his face caked in grime. He clapped her on the shoulder, her bruised shoulder, and she winced but didn't pull away. "You changed the game out here, Marquez," he said, eyes blazing with respect. "We'd be corpses without you." Elena opened her mouth, but found no words. The weight of what she'd done pressed down on her, not just the shots, not just the kills, but the realization that she had become the pivot on which their survival turned. She wasn't the intel officer anymore, not tonight. She was the sniper. The valley stank of smoke and iron. Clouds of dust drifted lazily in the air, glowing under the faint moonlight like the ghosts of the fallen. For a long moment, there was quiet, too much quiet. Elena lay prone behind her rifle, heart thundering in her ears, waiting for the next burst of chaos. Her cheek was raw where it had pressed against the Barrett stock. Her shoulder screamed every time she shifted, the bruises deepening with each recoil. But she refused to let go of the rifle. If she did, it would mean the fight was over. And she wasn't finished. Not yet. Movement flickered in her scope. A line of figures advanced cautiously along the far ridge, their weapons glinting under the pale light. The enemy hadn't broken completely. They were regrouping, trying to salvage their ambush. Elena's jaw clenched. She worked the bolt, chambering another round, and centered the crosshairs on the lead fighter. The rifle bellowed. The figure folded instantly, collapsing into the dust. The line faltered. She cycled the bolt, fired again. Another went down. The survivors ducked, scrambling for cover. Behind her, Dawson barked orders, rallying the squad. Push up the left flank. Marquez has the ridges. His words ignited something in the men. They surged forward, firing as they moved, their confidence rekindled by Elena's thunderous shield. For the first time all night, it was the Rangers dictating the fight, not the enemy. Elena's scope swept the battlefield, every movement a potential threat. She had no time to think about what she'd already done, no time to dwell on the growing number of bodies she had claimed. There was only the now, a muzzle flash, the crosshair, the trigger. A shadow darted from cover, shouldering an RPG. Elena exhaled, squeezed, and the man crumpled before he could fire. A pair of fighters tried to flank Dawson's squad from a side ridge. Elena shifted, lined them up, and unleashed two more thunderclaps. Both fell in the dust before they'd fired a shot. Each kill wasn't just survival, it was momentum. Every shot she fired gave her team another breath, another step, another chance to press forward, and they knew it. When Dawson called for covering fire, no one hesitated. When he shouted Marquez, "Ridge line now," she was already moving. Scope hunting, trigger ready. The team's trust in her grew with every moment, every thunderclap that cleared the path ahead. The enemy, however, wasn't blind. Through her scope, Elena caught sight of a man on the far ridge different from the rest. He wore darker gear, his movements more deliberate, more trained. He wasn't scrambling like the others. He was watching, calculating. Her stomach twisted. A commander. The man raised binoculars, scanning the valley floor, then pointed sharply to his fighters. They began to spread out, moving with renewed purpose. He wasn't just regrouping, he was planning to crush them. Elena's pulse quickened. If she could take him out, the enemy's coordination might collapse. But the range was extreme, farther than any shot she had tried yet. The angle was brutal, and the wind cut across the valley in unpredictable gusts. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the scope. She could almost hear Keller's voice in her head. Long shots are patience, breath, discipline. Don't chase the shot, let it come to you. She inhaled, held her breath, and steadied the crosshairs on the commander's chest. For a second, the world seemed to still. The Barrett roared. Through the scope, she saw the man stagger. His binoculars tumbled from his hands. Then he collapsed, vanishing into the dust. The fighters around him froze, confusion rippling through their lines. Shouts echoed across the ridge, disorganized, frantic. Elena allowed herself a single, shaky breath of relief. One shot, one fracture in their will. The battle shifted swiftly after that. With their coordination shattered, the enemy's fire grew erratic. Rangers pressed their advantage, grenades booming against weakened positions. The once formidable ambush was dissolving into pockets of resistance. Elena stayed on her scope, cutting down stragglers, before they could regroup. The Barrett had become an extension of her, its recoil no longer just pain but proof of her power. Yet even as victory crept closer, exhaustion gnawed at her. Her arms trembled with every reload. Her vision blurred between shots. The bruises on her shoulder throbbed with each recoil, and blood crusted at the corner of her lip where she'd bitten through it. Still, she refused to stop, not until the valley was theirs. Dawson dropped beside her briefly, panting, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. He glanced at the rifle, then at her, his expression a mix of awe and disbelief. "You're not intel anymore, Marcus," he said, voice hoarse. "Tonight you're the reason we're still standing." She opened her mouth, but no words came. She wasn't sure she believed it yet. Dawson gripped her shoulder, the uninjured one, and nodded firmly. "Keep it up. We're almost through this." Then he was gone, charging back into the fray. Elena turned back to her scope, jaw tight. Almost through this. She clung to the words like a lifeline. But the enemy wasn't finished. From the far ridge, fresh muzzle flashes lit the night dozens at once. Reinforcements. A new wave, pouring into the valley like ants from a disturbed nest. Elena's chest tightened. Her teammates were already pushing forward, stretched thin. And vulnerable. If the reinforcements hit them full force, the tide would turn again, and all they'd fought for would collapse. Her breath caught. Not again. Not on my watch. She lined up her scope, heart hammering. The first shot boomed, dropping a fighter mid-sprint. She cycled the bolt, fired again, another down. The Barrett roared and roared, each thunderclap cutting into the wave. Fighters stumbled, fell, scattered for cover. The advance slowed, fractured. Her team seized the moment, rallying around her gunfire. They hit the enemy hard, carving through. The weakened line. It wasn't clean. It wasn't easy. But slowly, brutally, they ground the ambush into dust. By the time the last shots echoed into silence, Elena's body was on the verge of collapse. She lay against the Barrett, chest heaving, arms trembling uncontrollably. The rifle's barrel smoked faintly. A beast sated for now. The valley was theirs. Rangers moved cautiously through the wreckage, checking bodies, securing weapons, dragging the wounded to cover. The air was thick with the groans of the dying, the rasp of radios, the crunch of boots on gravel. Dawson returned, crouching beside Elena. His voice was quiet this time, reverent. "You turned the tide, Marcus. Without you, we'd be dead." Men. Her lips parted, but again no words came. She was too tired, too raw, too shaken by the enormity of what she'd done. Instead, she simply nodded, her eyes fixed on the smoking ridges. The fight wasn't over. Not truly. Reinforcements could come. The enemy could regroup. But tonight here, no, they had survived because of her. And as much as it terrified her, Elena knew one thing for certain. She couldn't go back to who she was before. She wasn't just the intel officer anymore. She was the sniper who had turned the tide. The silence was almost worse than the gunfire. Elena lay flat on the ground, cheek pressed against the dirt, the Barrett still cradled against her aching shoulder. For a long moment, she didn't dare move. Her body trembled with exhaustion, each breath ragged, her ears still ringing from the thunder of the rifle. Around her, the valley was eerily still. No tracer fire. No mortar. Only the crackle of flames from a shattered truck in the distance, and the low groans of the wounded. The fight was over. But her mind refused to believe it. Her eyes darted. Back to the ridges, searching for any glint of metal, any sudden movement. Even in stillness, her finger twitched near the trigger, ready for the next phantom threat. Only when Dawson crouched beside her did she blink and finally breathe. "It's done," he said softly, though his voice carried the gravel of exhaustion. We've got the valley. Elena swallowed hard, lowering the rifle slowly, as if afraid setting it down would bring the enemy back. Her hands shook as she let it rest against the rocks, the barrel still faintly smoking. Her arms felt strangely naked without its weight. The team worked quickly, spreading out across the battlefield. Some dragged the wounded to safer ground. Others scavenged weapons and ammo. Keller lay propped against a boulder, pale but conscious, his leg bound tightly with bandages. He gave Elena a faint smile as she staggered toward him. "You made my rifle sing, Marcus," he rasped. "Didn't think you had it in you." Her lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to protest, to tell him she wasn't a sniper, that she had only filled a gap because there was no one else. But the lie would have tasted bitter. She had done it. And that terrified her more than the gunfire ever had. Keller seemed to read her silence. His smile faded, replaced by something harder. "It doesn't get easier, you know. The faces stay. The weight stays. You just carry it because someone has to." Elena clenched her fists, staring down at the dirt. The words pressed heavy on her chest, heavier even than the Barrett. Someone had to. Hours passed in fragments. Rangers tended wounds, counted ammunition, sent radio updates. The dead, both friend and foe, were lined in grim rows, waiting for transport. Elena moved through it all in a haze. She checked on Keller, helped bandage another ranger's arm, carried water for the wounded. But no matter what she did, her eyes kept drifting back to the Barrett, resting against a rock. She could still feel its recoil in her bones, still hear its roar echoing in her ears. Every time she blinked, she saw the bodies through her scope, the RPG gunner, the machine gun nest, the commander on the ridge, each face frozen at the moment she had ended them. And yet, beneath the horror, there was something else. A strange, unwelcome pride. The knowledge that without those shots, the rows of American dead would have been far longer. It was that contradiction that gnawed at her the most. Night deepened. The team huddled in a makeshift perimeter, wary of counterattack. Elena sat apart, back against a stone, the Barrett across her knees. Her hands moved over it, instinctively checking the scope, wiping dust from the receiver, ensuring the magazine was seated. It was no longer just Keller's rifle. It had become hers, whether she wanted it or not. Dawson approached quietly, settling beside her. His face was etched with fatigue, but his eyes were sharp, still carrying the fire of command. "You did. More tonight than I could have asked of anyone," he said. "You turned the tide." Elena stared at the rifle in her lap. "I wasn't supposed to. That's not who I am." Dawson was silent for a moment, watching her carefully. "War doesn't care who you think you are. It shows you who you have to be." She flinched at the truth of it. "You saved lives," he continued. "Don't lose sight of that." Elena wanted to believe him. She wanted to accept that all the faces in her scope had been the enemy, that every shot was justified. But the images burned too vividly. They weren't faceless. They were men with hands, eyes, fear. She had ended them. "I don't know if I can carry it," she whispered. Dawson's gaze softened. "You already are." Sleep came in fragments, broken by nightmares. Elena saw the commander's binoculars. Falling from his hands, the RPG gunner's frozen shock, the faces of the men she had cut down. She woke gasping, fingers clenched around the Barrett's grip, as if it were a lifeline. By dawn, her eyes were bloodshot, her body hollow with fatigue. But the fight wasn't finished. Word came through the radios. The valley was only the beginning. The ambush had been part of something larger, an enemy stronghold hidden deeper in the mountains. The reinforcements from the night before had only been a fraction of what was coming. Elena felt her stomach drop. If last night had been survival, What waited ahead would be annihilation. The team gathered, battered but resolute. Keller insisted on staying with the wounded, unable to march on. His eyes found Elena as she slung the Barrett over her shoulder. "You're carrying it now," he said simply. "Make it count." She nodded, though the weight of the weapon felt heavier than ever. As the Rangers began their climb into the mountains, Elena lingered at the edge of the valley, glancing back one last time. The ridges still smoked, scarred with craters and broken bodies. This was where she had changed, where she had crossed the line she never thought she would. And though she hated what it meant, she knew the truth. She would have to do it again. The mountains loomed like jagged teeth against the dawn. Shadows stretched across the ridges, swallowing the narrow trail where the Rangers moved single file. Each man was silent, boots crunching softly on loose rock, weapons gripped tight. At the center of the column walked Elena, the Barrett slung across her chest. Its weight was punishing, each step dragging her body closer to collapse. Yet she clung to it, because she knew, just as Keller had, that the rifle was more than steel and firepower. It was survival. The valley had been an ambush, but ahead lay something far worse, the enemy stronghold. Radio intercepts described. Caves cut into the cliffs, bunkers laced with heavy weapons, and fighters numbering in the dozens. To charge blindly would be suicide. To retreat meant abandoning the wounded, leaving the mission unfinished. So they moved forward. Hours into the march, the trail widened into a rocky plateau. Dawson raised a fist, halting the column. He crouched behind cover, scanning the cliffs. "Eyes up," he murmured. "They're here." Elena dropped prone, Barrett sliding into place against her bruised shoulder. Her scope swept the rocks, searching for the faintest flicker of movement. There on the ridge, a glint of metal. "Contact, 2 o'clock high," she whispered into her radio. The words had barely left her lips before gunfire erupted. Bullets chewed the rocks, sparks flying. The Rangers scattered for cover, returning fire in controlled bursts. Elena steadied her breath, centered her crosshairs on the glint, and fired. The Barrett roared, the enemy rifle shattered, and a fighter tumbled from the ridge. "Keep firing," Dawson shouted. "Marquez, suppress that high ground." Her world shrank again into the circle of her scope. She picked out muzzle flashes, shadows darting between rocks, silhouettes raising launchers. Each one fell under her thunder. The ridges shook with her defiance, every shot carving a hole in the enemy's momentum. But the stronghold had woken. From hidden caves, fighters poured out, their weapons spitting fire. A mortar thumped, and an explosion tore the plateau apart, throwing men into the dust. Elena's ears rang, but she forced herself back to the scope, teeth clenched against panic. Another mortar teamed 3 men, hunched over a tube. She exhaled, squeezed, and one was gone. She cycled the bolt, fired again, the second fell. The third fled, abandoning the weapon. The Rangers roared in triumph, pressing forward under her cover. But the enemy was learning. A sniper cracked a round dangerously close to Elena's head, shattering stone inches from her face. She ducked instinctively, heart pounding. "There, hunting me." Sweat stung her eyes as she shifted position, dragging the Barrett to a new angle. She scanned the ridges, pulse racing. A flicker of movement there, tucked into shadow. She didn't hesitate. The Barrett thundered, and the rival sniper collapsed, rifle clattering from his perch. Relief flooded her, but it was short-lived. A fresh wave surged from the caves, heavier armed, disciplined. This wasn't desperation. They were defending their home. "Push forward," Dawson bellowed. "We take that cave, or we don't make it out." Grenades boomed, Rangers advanced, and Elena kept firing, the Barrett's thunder clearing every step of their path. The fight dragged into a brutal grind. The Rangers were exhausted, battered, but every time they faltered, Elena's rifle roared them back to life. She shattered machine gun nests, silenced RPG teams, and broke every attempt to flank. Her body screamed in protest. Her shoulder was raw meat, her cheek bruised purple, her arms trembling violently. Each recoil felt like it might shatter her bones, but she refused to stop. Because if she did, the men she fought beside would fall. The Barrett had become more than a weapon. It was her voice, her will, her defiance carved into the mountains themselves. Finally, after hours of relentless fighting, they reached the mouth of the stronghold. Smoke billowed from its dark maw, gunfire spitting from within. The Rangers stacked on the entrance, preparing for the final breach. "Elena," Dawson said, crouching beside her, his voice raw but steady, "we can't do this without you." Her throat tightened. "I'm not built for this," she whispered, the old words slipping out one last time. Dawson shook his head. "You've already proved you are. You've been carrying all of us. Finish it." His faith struck harder than any recoil. She nodded, pressing the Barrett to her shoulder one more time. When the Rangers charged, she was their storm. Every muzzle flash from within the caves met her thunder. Every shadow rising to fire was cut down before it could act. She covered the push, cleared the bottlenecks, and when Dawson hurled a grenade into the depths, she was the one who silenced the last defender trying to stop him. The explosion rocked the mountainside, flames belching from the cave. The stronghold shuddered, then went still. And for the first time, in what felt like forever, silence returned. The Rangers staggered into the ruined stronghold, smoke curling. Around them, weapons lowered in disbelief. They had done it. Against the odds, against the ambush, against the sheer numbers, they had taken the enemy's heart. Dawson leaned heavily against a wall, eyes finding Elena. He gave a weary grin. "You just wrote the story they'll tell about this mission, Marquez." She stared down at the Barrett in her hands. The beast that had bruised her, broken her, and yet carried them all to victory. Her reflection in the scope was unrecognizable. Not the intel officer, not the woman who sat behind screens. She was something forged in fire and recoil, something she had never believed she could be. The sniper who turned defeat into victory. The silence pressed heavy, broken only by the crackle of flames. Elena exhaled, the weight of it all crashing. Down at once fear, pride, guilt, relief. Her body sagged, but she kept hold of the rifle. She knew she would never truly set it down. Some burdens weren't meant to be dropped. They were meant to be carried. As the team regrouped and prepared for extraction, Elena sat at the cave's edge, staring out over the valley below. The sun was rising, casting gold across the scarred battlefield. The mountains were quiet now. She knew the faces of the fallen would never leave her. She knew the weight of what she had done would stay forever. But as she glanced at her brothers in arms, alive, battered, but breathing, she also knew this truth. She had saved them. Not because she wanted to, but because she had chosen to. And in that choice, she had become something new. Not just a survivor, a legend.